The details for George Lucas's canceled live-action Star Wars show titled Star Wars Underworld have just been revealed, and it's possible that this show could still be released by Lucasfilm today as George Lucas's return to Star Wars.
Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm!
Now, not only were there 60 completed scripts for the show and each episode would cost $40 million, but now there's a possibility that this Underworld show could become a reality as one of the next live-action Disney Plus Star Wars shows. Yeah, that's right. George Lucas would be making a return to Star Wars with this Star Wars Underworld show. And hopefully today in 2025, it will not cost $2 billion to make. But let's talk about that. So let's start with the details that have been revealed for this show. Because not only are there 60 finished scripts for 60 episodes of this show, but there's also almost 10 minutes of test footage that was created during the time of George Lucas still owning Star Wars before he sold the company to Disney in 2012. So I guess the first question that has to be answered is why now? Why are all these details about this awesome show coming out now? Well, that's because Rick McCallum, who was a producer on the prequel trilogy and worked for Lucasfilm for quite some time, just had a new interview with Young Indie Chronicles podcast, where he revealed all these insane details about George Lucas's canceled $2 billion Star Wars show. Now, in this interview, he revealed so much, but here are the massive bullet points. So Star Wars Underworld was going to be more dark, sexy, and violent than any other Star Wars production before it. And yes, keep in mind that the only other Star Wars projects at this time were the first 6 movies. Now, more dark, sexy, and violent than any other Star Wars project before, well, now it's 2025, and we've gotten some more dark sides of Star Wars, from Darth Maul chopping people's heads off in animation to shows like The Mandalorian or even Andor, which take a more dark and sexy approach. I mean, not for nothing, but Cyril eating cereal gets me every time. But with that being said, this show would have been Andor before Andor, showing you the underworld of Coruscant and the underworld of Star Wars. Now, since this show was canceled, we've seen a ton of the Underworld from Star Wars. So you can assume that a lot of that Underworld stuff on Coruscant in the Clone Wars was taken from this show. This show that had 60 fully written scripts. That means not only were they working on this project for years, but they intended to have 60 plus episodes, telling an insane story over the course of multiple seasons. And not only that, this show is actually meant to connect to a video game called Star Wars 1313, which was also canceled. Now, the 1313 game, as you can see here in the concept art, would have starred a Boba Fett type character or even Boba Fett himself in the underworld of Coruscant. Now, to have a video game and a multi-season show running side by side that connect to each other, well, that sounds like what's kind of going on right now in Star Wars. Cal Kestis has not made his way over to live action yet, but obviously they've set up the character in the Jedi games, Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, to connect to all these different stories. In some more direct ways, like the hidden path being seen in both the Jedi games and the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, but also in possible setups for the future, like Merrin being a Night Sister coming from Dathomir, and Grand Admiral Thrawn just arriving on Dathomir at the end of Ahsoka Season 1. So you can see, again, how they're taking aspects from what this show is going to do, connecting a video game to the shows, and that idea has been taken and has been used on what's being created right now from Disney Star Wars. But let's not gloss over the fact that there are 60 fully written scripts ready to go for a Star Wars Underworld show. That means at any moment, Lucasfilm could just announce this show and be ready to go. I'm sure after all these years, the scripts do need some fixing up. Maybe certain characters either don't exist anymore because they died off, or they could introduce new characters that they've created over these years, like giving us a character like Omega that was just introduced in the Bad Batch and putting that character into live action in a Star Wars Underworld show. And if Lucasfilm were to announce a Star Wars Underworld show, then Star Wars fans immediately would know that is George Lucas's canceled project. And if there's one thing that Star Wars fans really like, is George Lucas working on Star Wars. So if you announce an Underworld show and say George Lucas created this, well, Star Wars fans are going to drop everything to go watch that series. So you might be saying,
Mike, if Lucasfilm is really sitting on top of this gold mine of a show, why haven't they created it yet?
Well, that's a great question. And that brings us to the thumbnail of this video. $2 billion is what's stopping this show from being created. The budget for Star Wars Disney Plus shows now, they're not a secret, and really they're not cheap at all. But when you look at what Rick describes in this podcast, the most eye-popping aspect of this Underworld show was the reporting cost. $40 million per episode. Now, this is just some simple math. 40 times 60 episodes is $2.4 billion. Now, granted, this was Rick McCallum's math about 20 years ago, so $40 million back then was a lot more than $40 million now. However, even still, with the crazy amount of money that is spent on Andor Season 2 and The Acolyte, and live-action Disney Plus shows in general, $40 million per episode would still, by far, be the biggest Star Wars Disney Plus show to date. And the last sentence in this bullet point can't go unnoticed. To get the sense of what George Lucas's idea of scale was here, John Williams was supposed to score the entire series. Okay, so if you've been living under a rock for about the last 50 years, then you don't know who John Williams is. The greatest composer, in my personal opinion, of all time, giving you the score of all three main trilogies for the Star Wars universe, but he doesn't stop there. He does the score for Jaws, Jurassic Park, Superman, the early Harry Potter movies, Indiana Jones. You name a movie from the 70s, 80s, or 90s that has an incredible soundtrack, I can pretty much guarantee that John Williams did it. However, scoring a 2-hour movie is a little different than 60 episodes of a show. So George Lucas was going big here. The $40 million was probably a conservative number at the time. And now with new technology and stuff, you could probably dwindle that number down to a more reasonable, hopefully $25 million per episode. But who knows? Creating Coruscant in live action is not an easy task. And doing it for 60 episodes over again is probably going to cost a pretty penny. However, although this show was canceled, Rick explains in this interview that it was very close to being made. HBO was the only network that even entertained the idea of this series, but there was ultimately just no way at that price. $40 million an episode, especially in the early 2000s, is insane. However, there was this weird twist. George Lucas had a meeting set with the HBO CEO, Chris, but the day before their meeting, he was arrested for assault and was forced to resign. So ultimately, the 60 scripts that were fully completed and this over 10 minutes of test footage were all for nothing, as this project was canceled. And well, you know the rest. In 2012, George Lucas sells the company of Lucasfilm to Disney for $4 billion. And for the last 13 years, we've gotten Star Wars projects on Disney Plus on the big screen and everywhere else throughout the media. Video games, books, comics, you name it. However, although we have seen a lot of live-action Disney Plus shows from Star Wars that have been quote-unquote successful, such as The Mandalorian, which is now moving to the big screen with the Mandalorian and Grogu movie coming out next May, it's almost as if Lucasfilm is sitting on top of a gold mine with 60 fully finished scripts from George Lucas for a canceled Star Wars Underworld series. So with all these crazy details that were revealed by Rick McCallum in this podcast, well, the question has to be asked. Should this Star Wars Underworld show still be made? Should Disney take these 60 scripts out of the archives and make the show? Should they contact George Lucas, have him come back as a producer on the project that got canceled all those years ago? It sounds like a no-brainer to me, but with all these details from this show having been revealed now, you tell me in the comment section below. Should we as Star Wars fans use the power that we have as a community, tell Lucasfilm to make this show? Because Star Wars fans seem to not understand that we have this insane amount of power. You've seen it happen for a good thing and for a bad every once in a while. For example, The Acolyte Season 2 getting canceled last summer. You can also look at the good side, where Star Wars fans made Rosario Dawson become the live-action version of Ahsoka Tano. Star Wars fandom did that. So we have the opportunity here. If the Star Wars fandom really wants to see this George Lucas canceled Underworld show, where 60 scripts are ready to go, then we can do it. But the question remains, do you want it? Tell me in the comment section below. And while we're at it, let's get that 1313 game as well. But with all these crazy talk of canceled live action shows, there's one that isn't canceled and it's right around the corner, and that is Andor Season 2. And the trailer for that second season just dropped the other day, and I broke down the entire thing in this video right here.